As American and Russian diplomats convene amidst the stark landscapes of Alaska, another global power is observing with profound interest from thousands of miles away. This is, of course, China. The summit, ostensibly about de-escalating the long-simmering conflict in Ukraine and redefining the contours of European security, carries immense weight for Beijing. For China, the outcome of these talks is not merely a distant foreign policy event. Instead, it represents a critical juncture that could either validate or unravel its carefully constructed grand strategy. The discussions in Alaska will directly impact China's most crucial strategic partnership, its long-term competition with the United States, and its economic ties with Europe, making this a moment of both significant opportunity and considerable risk. The stakes are incredibly high because the world order is in a state of flux, a condition that China has both contributed to and sought to exploit. The post-Cold War era, long dominated by the United States, is visibly fraying at the edges. Beijing sees this summit as a key indicator of America's current power and its willingness to negotiate with a rival. The relationship between the United States, Russia, and China forms a strategic triangle that will define the 21st century. The dynamics between any 2 points of this triangle inevitably affect the third. A rapprochement between Washington and Moscow could isolate Beijing, leaving it to face a more united Western bloc. Conversely, a failed summit that deepens the Russia-West rift could further solidify the Sino-Russian axis. Every word and every gesture and every line of the final communique will be scrutinized in Beijing for clues about its future. To understand China's position, we must first look at its no-limits partnership with Russia. This alliance, declared just before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, is the bedrock of Beijing's foreign policy. It is built on a shared mission: to dismantle the unipolar world order dominated by the United States. For both Moscow and Beijing, this is not just a strategic preference but an existential necessity. They see American power as a direct threat to their systems of government and their spheres of influence. However, since the war in Ukraine began, China has performed a delicate balancing act. While providing crucial economic and diplomatic support to Russia, it has carefully avoided direct military aid that would trigger severe secondary sanctions from the West. This stance is not born of indecision but of a calculated strategy. China wants Russia to remain a strong, independent pole of power that distracts and drains American resources. But it does not want Russia's actions to drag China into a direct economic war with the United States and Europe. The partnership is fundamentally asymmetric. Russia is now the junior partner, increasingly dependent on China for trade, technology, and political legitimacy. China, on the other hand, is the global economic powerhouse. This gives Beijing significant leverage. It can modulate its support for Moscow to suit its own interests. If the West pushes too hard, China can increase its assistance to Russia. If an opportunity for better relations with Europe arises, it can moderate its pro-Russian rhetoric. China's complex strategy since the start of the Ukraine war can be broken down into 3 core objectives. The first and most immediate goal is to ensure Russia does not lose. A decisive defeat for Moscow would be a catastrophic outcome for Beijing. It would not only eliminate a vital strategic partner but would also serve as a powerful demonstration of Western unity and resolve. The United States and its allies, emboldened by their success in Europe, would then be free to turn their full attention and resources toward containing China in the Asia-Pacific. The second goal is to weaken American influence without engaging in direct conflict. China prefers to win the great power competition on the economic and technological fronts, not the military one. The Ukraine war, from this perspective, has been a strategic gift. It has diverted American attention, treasure, and military hardware to Europe, slowing the so-called pivot to Asia that has long worried Chinese planners. A prolonged, low-level but stable confrontation between Russia and the West serves this objective perfectly. The third, and perhaps most delicate objective, is to maintain and, where possible, repair its relationship with Europe. Europe is one of China's largest trading partners, and Beijing understands that a complete rupture with the continent would be economically devastating. Chinese diplomacy has worked hard to drive a wedge between Washington and major European capitals like Paris and Berlin. These 3 goals form a complex and sometimes contradictory trinity. This is the tightrope China walks. Looking at the Alaska summit, China sees a landscape of both tantalizing opportunities and profound risks. The greatest opportunity is that the talks lead to a de-escalation that effectively rewards Russia's actions. If the United States and Russia agree to a settlement that freezes the conflict in Ukraine and implicitly accepts some of Russia's security demands, Beijing will see this as a major victory. It would prove that a determined challenge to the American-led order can succeed. This would validate China's own long-term strategy of patiently building its power and resisting American pressure. Such an outcome would also offer tangible benefits. A stable, non-defeated Russia would remain a reliable strategic partner for China, continuing to serve as a counterweight to American power. However, the risks are just as significant. China's biggest fear is a summit that backfires on Russia and, by extension, on China itself. If the talks collapse and the United States concludes that diplomacy is futile, it could lead to a massive increase in military aid to Ukraine and a new, more punishing wave of sanctions against Russia. Crucially, these new sanctions could target Chinese firms and banks accused of helping Moscow's war effort. This would force Beijing into a direct confrontation with the combined economic might of the United States and Europe, a scenario it has desperately sought to avoid. Ultimately, China hopes for a world where its rise is unimpeded, and it fears a world where it is forced to choose sides in a costly global conflict. Its ideal outcome from the Alaska summit is an ambiguous peace, one that stops the bleeding for Russia but does not fully restore Western prestige or unity. Its nightmare scenario is a reinvigorated Western alliance, laser-focused on confronting its authoritarian challengers, with China designated as the next primary target. As the world awaits the results from Alaska, Beijing will continue to play its long game, carefully balancing its support for its Russian partner against its own self-interest, ever ready to adapt to the shifting tectonics of the New World Order.